I was staring at the bright orange notice taped to my front door when my phone started ringing, and I knew my Tuesday morning was about to get a whole lot worse. The paper fluttered in the November breeze coming off Lake Michigan, and even from 10 feet away, I could read the bold letters spelling out "Violation Notice" across the top. My name, Ian Yardley, was printed below in that same aggressive font the Riverside Meadows HOA seemed to love using whenever they wanted to remind us peasants who really owned our properties. "This is Ian," I answered, already walking toward the door to rip down whatever fresh nonsense Patricia Morrison had dreamed up this time. "Mr. Yardley, this is Patricia Morrison from the Riverside Meadows Homeowners Association Board." Her voice had that particular nasal quality that made my teeth hurt. "I'm calling to ensure you received our violation notice regarding the industrial equipment illegally stored on your property." I yanked the notice off my door, leaving a strip of tape stuck to the wood. "I'm looking at it right now, Patricia, and it's not industrial equipment, it's a forklift that I need for my business. According to Section 7.3 of our community guidelines, no commercial vehicles or equipment may be stored in residential driveways or visible from the street. The fine is $500, due within 7 business days. $500. I felt my blood pressure spike as I scanned the notice. Sure enough, there it was in black and white, along with a grainy photo of my Toyota 8 FGU25 forklift sitting in my driveway next to my pickup truck. The photo must have been taken from the street, probably from Patricia's white Lexus, as she made her rounds looking for violations like some kind of suburban predator. "That forklift is essential equipment for my catering business," I said, forcing myself to keep my voice level. "I use it almost daily to load and unload supplies. I have a registered business operating from this property. The covenant is quite clear, Mr. Yardley. No exceptions. If you wish to appeal, you may submit a written request to the board, but the fine stands until your appeal is heard and approved." She paused, and I could practically hear her smile through the phone. "Have a blessed day." She hung up before I could respond. I stood there on my front porch in my old college sweatshirt and jeans, looking at the bright yellow forklift parked innocently next to my Ford F-250. The whole situation was absurd. I had been living in this subdivision outside of Naperville, Illinois for 3 years, running my catering business from my property for 2 of those years, and suddenly, my forklift was a problem. The machine was a beautiful piece of equipment, honestly. I had bought it used 6 months ago when my catering company, Yardley's Premium Events, started landing bigger contracts. Before that, I had been hand-loading everything or renting equipment, which was eating into my profits. The forklift had paid for itself in 3 months just from the time and labor it saved. It could lift my commercial refrigeration units, my bulk food storage containers, even the modular kitchen equipment I brought to outdoor events. Without it, I would have to hire 2 extra people for every job just for the heavy lifting. I walked back inside, my mind already racing through options. My house was a decent-sized colonial on a quarter-acre lot, with a detached garage that I had converted into my catering prep kitchen and storage facility. I had all the proper permits, all the health department approvals, all the business licenses. Everything was legitimate and legal according to the village of Naperville and DuPage County. But apparently, Patricia Morrison and her HOA cronies had other ideas. My phone buzzed with a text from my business partner and best friend since high school, Marcus Chen. "Dude, did you see the HOA notice? Rachel just got one too for her vegetable garden being too tall. These people are insane." I texted back quickly. "Got mine. $500 for the forklift, calling my lawyer. The lawyer comment was optimistic. I knew a guy who had helped me with the business incorporation, but I had no idea if he dealt with HOA disputes. Still, $500 was not pocket change, and I was not about to let Patricia push me around over equipment I legitimately needed for my licensed business. I made myself a cup of coffee and sat down at my kitchen table with my laptop. The Riverside Meadows HOA covenant was available on their website, all 47 pages of it. I had skimmed it when I bought the house, but like most people, I had not memorized every single rule. Now I needed to understand exactly what I was dealing with. Section 7.3 was indeed about vehicles and equipment. It prohibited commercial vehicles exceeding 1-ton capacity, recreational vehicles, boats, trailers, or industrial equipment from being parked or stored in driveways, front yards, or any location visible from the street for more than 24 hours. I read it 3 times, looking for loopholes. The forklift definitely counted as industrial equipment under most definitions, but there was nothing in the language about exceptions for licensed businesses operating on the property. In fact, there was no mention of home-based businesses at all in this section. I kept reading. Section 3.8 dealt with business activities on residential properties. It was vague, stating only that residents may conduct business activities that do not create excessive traffic, noise, or visual disruption to the residential character of the community, subject to board approval. Subject to board approval. I had never sought board approval for my catering business because the village had already approved it. When I applied for my business license with Naperville 2 years ago, I had to demonstrate that my activities would not negatively impact my neighbors. The village inspector had come out, looked at my setup, confirmed that I was not running a restaurant or retail operation, and issued my license without any problems. Catering meant I prepared food on site and transported it to events. No customers came to my house. No foot traffic. Just me, occasionally Marcus, and delivery trucks dropping off supplies every couple of weeks. I needed to find out who else was on this HOA board besides Patricia. The website listed 5 board members: Patricia Morrison as president, Kenneth Hayes as vice president, Diane Fletcher as treasurer, Robert Cunningham as secretary, and Linda Kowalski as member at large. I recognized some of the names from neighborhood functions, but I had never interacted with any of them beyond polite waves. My next move was clear. I needed to file that written appeal Patricia had mentioned, and I needed to do it with every piece of documentation I could muster. If this board wanted a fight over my essential business equipment, I would give them one backed up by official government documents. I spent the next 2 hours drafting my appeal letter. I attached copies of my business license, my DuPage County catering permit, my health department certification, my vehicle registration showing the forklift was registered to my business, and photographs of my garage facility. I explained in detail how the forklift was essential equipment for my daily business operations, not a hobby vehicle or storage issue. I noted that it was well maintained, properly insured, and posed no safety risk to the community. The appeal letter was 5 pages long when I finished, plus attachments. Maybe overkill, but I wanted to make absolutely clear that this was not some random piece of junk cluttering up my driveway. This was legitimate business equipment for a legitimate business. I printed everything, made copies for my records, and drove to the subdivision's management office on Ogden Avenue. The office was tucked into a small strip mall between a nail salon and a tax preparation service. A bored-looking woman in her 20s sat behind the front desk scrolling through her phone. I need to submit an appeal to the HOA board, I said, handing her my envelope. She barely looked up. Fill out this form. The form asked for my name, address, violation number, and reason for appeal. I filled it out while standing at the counter, then handed everything back. She stamped it with a date stamp and tossed it in a tray marked Board Review. When does the board meet? I asked. Third Thursday of every month. That's next week. Will I be able to attend and present my case? She shrugged. You can request to be on the agenda. Send an email to the board address on the website. Not exactly helpful, but at least I had a timeline. I sent the email requesting to appear at next week's meeting as soon as I got back to my truck. The next few days passed in a blur of work. I had a corporate event on Wednesday, a wedding reception on Friday, and a birthday party on Saturday. Each job required the forklift. On Wednesday, I used it to load 2 commercial refrigerators full of appetizers and salads. On Friday, I lifted an entire modular bar setup that weighed close to 800 pounds. On Saturday, I moved my portable kitchen equipment, including 2 convection ovens and a range unit. Every time I used that forklift, I thought about Patricia Morrison and her stupid fine. The machine was not just convenient, it was absolutely necessary. Without it, I would need to rent equipment for every job at about $200 per rental, or hire additional labor at around $150 per person per event. Over the course of a month, we were talking thousands of dollars in additional operating costs. The HOA fine was outrageous, but the business impact of not having the forklift would be catastrophic. On Monday, I received an email response from the HOA board secretary, Robert Cunningham. It was brief and formal. Your request to appear at the November board meeting has been approved. You will be allotted 10 minutes during the open forum portion of the meeting. The meeting will be held Thursday, November 21st at 7:00 p.m. at the Riverside Meadows Clubhouse. Your appeal has been received and will be reviewed. 10 minutes. I had to condense everything into 10 minutes. I started preparing a presentation, pulling together my strongest arguments and documents. This was not just about the $500 fine anymore. This was about whether I could continue operating my business from my property. Thursday evening came too quickly. I put on a button-down shirt and khakis, trying to look professional but not overly formal. I loaded my documents into a leather folder and drove to the clubhouse, a building I had only been inside once before for a community garage sale. The clubhouse was small but nice, with a main meeting room that could hold maybe 50 people. When I arrived at 6:55, the 5 board members were already seated at a long table at the front of the room. Patricia Morrison sat in the center, wearing a burgundy blazer and a string of pearls that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. She was in her early 50s, with blonde hair styled in that particular way that screamed, "I want to speak to your manager." The other board members flanked her on either side, all looking equally serious and self-important. About 15 other residents were scattered in the chairs facing the board. I recognized a few faces, including Rachel Tanaka, Marcus's neighbor, who had gotten fined for her vegetable garden. She caught my eye and gave me a small nod of solidarity. Patricia called the meeting to order at exactly 7:00, banging a small gavel like we were in actual court. They went through the standard opening business: approval of last month's minutes, treasurer's report, discussion of upcoming holiday decorations for the subdivision entrance. It was all painfully boring, and I could feel my anxiety building as I waited for the open forum portion. Finally, at 7:45, Patricia announced, "We will now move to the open forum. We have 2 residents scheduled to speak tonight. First, Rachel Tanaka regarding her violation notice for landscaping non-compliance. Rachel stood and walked to the front, clutching a folder similar to mine. She was a small woman, maybe 5 feet tall, but she had fire in her eyes. "Thank you for hearing me," she started. "I received a violation notice because my tomato plants supposedly exceed the allowable height for vegetation visible from the street. But the covenant says nothing about vegetable gardens specifically. It only restricts trees and shrubs over 6 feet. My tomato plants are 5 feet, 8 inches tall, which I measured carefully. They're also in my side yard, barely visible from the street unless you're specifically looking for them." Patricia did not even glance at Rachel's documentation. "The spirit of the covenant is to maintain aesthetic uniformity. Vegetable gardens in front or side yards visible from the street detract from our community's appearance. The fine stands at $250 unless you remove the garden." "But they're not violating the actual written rule," Rachel protested. "The board has the authority to interpret the covenants in the best interest of the community," Kenneth Hayes, the vice president, chimed in. He was a heavy-set man in his 60s with a comb over that fooled nobody. "Our interpretation is that vegetable gardens of any height in visible locations are not appropriate for our neighborhood aesthetic." Rachel looked like she wanted to argue more, but Patricia had already moved on. "Thank you for your input, Ms. Tanaka. The board will take your comments under advisement, but the violation stands." Next, we have Ian Yardley regarding commercial equipment storage. I stood on legs that felt unsteady and walked to the front of the room. 5 pairs of eyes stared at me, and none of them looked friendly. "Thank you for hearing my appeal," I began, opening my folder. "I received a $500 fine for storing my forklift in my driveway. I'm here to explain why this equipment is essential to my licensed business and should be exempt from the commercial equipment prohibition." I launched into my presentation, explaining Yardley's premium events, showing my business license, my catering permits, my health department certifications. I explained how the forklift was used almost daily for legitimate business purposes. I showed photos of it loading equipment, demonstrated its necessity with cost analyses of the alternatives, and argued that my business operated completely within the village's regulations. Patricia let me finish, barely. As soon as I took a breath, she cut in. "Mr. Yardley, I appreciate your passion for your business, but the covenant is explicit. No industrial equipment visible from the street. Your forklift is clearly industrial equipment, and it's clearly visible from the street. The village's approval of your business license is irrelevant to our community standards." "But my business is legal and licensed," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "The forklift is registered to my business, insured and essential for my daily operations. Forcing me to remove it would severely damage my ability to earn a living." Deanne Fletcher, the treasurer, spoke up. She was younger than Patricia, maybe mid-40s, with sharp features and sharper eyes. "You could rent storage space for your equipment at a commercial facility. Many business owners do that. Your personal economic considerations are not the HOA's concern. Renting separate storage space would cost me over $1,000 a month, plus I would need to transport the forklift back and forth for every job," I countered. "That's not practical or reasonable." "The covenant does not require us to be practical or reasonable regarding your business needs," Patricia said coldly. "It requires us to maintain community standards. Your appeal is denied. The fine stands, and you have 14 days from the original notice date to remove the equipment from visibility or face additional daily fines of $100. I felt my face flush. "You're telling me I have to choose between my livelihood and living in this neighborhood?" "We're telling you to follow the rules you agreed to when you purchased your property," Kenneth Hayes said. "Everyone else manages to comply. Why should you be special?" "Because I have a legal business that requires this equipment," I said, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. "I'm not asking to park a fleet of trucks or run a warehouse. It's one piece of equipment that sits quietly in my driveway and bothers nobody." "It bothers the board, and the board represents the community," Patricia said. She banged her gavel. "Your appeal is denied. This matter is closed." Next item on the agenda. I stood there for a moment, shocked by how quickly they had dismissed everything. 2 years of building my business, all the proper permits and licenses, the investment in equipment. None of it mattered to these 5 people who had appointed themselves the arbiters of what belonged in their neighborhood. I walked back to my seat in a daze. Rachel gave me a sympathetic look. The meeting dragged on for another 30 minutes, but I did not hear any of it. My mind was racing through options, none of them good. When the meeting finally adjourned, I walked out to my truck and sat in the parking lot for a long time. Through the clubhouse windows, I could see Patricia and the other board members chatting and laughing like they had not just crushed 2 people's legitimate concerns without a second thought. I drove home feeling defeated. The forklift sat in my driveway, bathed in my porch light, looking like the most innocent piece of equipment in the world. In 11 days, if I did not move it, the HOA would start charging me $100 per day. In less than 2 months, those daily fines would exceed what the forklift was worth. I went inside and did what any rational person in 2025 does when facing an injustice. I started researching. I spent hours that night reading about HOA disputes, Illinois property law, and business rights. What I found was not encouraging. HOAs in Illinois had broad authority to enforce their covenants, and courts were generally reluctant to overturn board decisions unless there was clear evidence of discrimination or violations of state law. But I also found something interesting. Illinois law required HOAs to act reasonably and in good faith. They could not enforce rules in an arbitrary or capricious manner. And they definitely could not enforce rules that violated other laws, including laws protecting legitimate business activities. The village of Naperville had granted me a license to operate my catering business from my residential property. That license specifically contemplated that I would have commercial equipment on site. The village had inspected my property and approved my operations. Did the HOA have the authority to override that municipal approval? I was not a lawyer, but it seemed like a question worth asking one. Friday morning, I called Thomas Brennan, the attorney who had helped me incorporate my business. I explained the situation, and he listened without interrupting. "That's an interesting case," he said when I finished. "HOAs have a lot of power, but they're not absolute. The question is whether their covenant enforcement is trumped by your municipal business license. I would need to research the specific statutes, but I think you might have an argument that the HOA is interfering with your lawful business operations." "What would that cost?" I asked, knowing legal fees could bankrupt me faster than the HOA's fines. "Let me do some preliminary research, maybe 10 hours, around $2,000. If we need to file something, we're looking at more. But let's start with a strongly worded letter to the board explaining their potential liability. Sometimes that's enough to make them back down." $2,000. I winced but agreed. The alternative was paying the $500 fine plus potentially thousands in daily penalties, or shutting down my business. At least this way I was fighting back. Over the weekend, I had 3 more events. Each one required the forklift. Each time I used it, I documented everything with photos and time stamps. If this went to court, I wanted to demonstrate exactly how essential this equipment was. On Monday, Tom Brennan called me back. "I've been researching your situation, and I think we have a solid argument. Illinois has a Home-Based Business Act that protects residents' rights to operate businesses from their homes as long as they comply with local ordinances. You comply with all of Naperville's ordinances. The HOA is essentially trying to override the village's determination that your business is appropriate for residential operation." "So what do we do?" I asked, feeling the first glimmer of hope in days. "I'm drafting a letter to the board citing the relevant statutes and explaining that their enforcement action may constitute illegal interference with your licensed business. I'm also pointing out that if they persist, you may have grounds to sue for damages including lost business income." That should get their attention. The letter went out on Tuesday via certified mail and email. I got a read receipt on the email within an hour, so I knew Patricia had seen it. Then came the waiting. Wednesday morning, my phone rang at 8 a.m. It was Patricia Morrison, and she sounded different. Less smug, more cautious. "Mr. Yardley, the board received your attorney's letter. We would like to schedule a meeting to discuss this matter further before pursuing additional enforcement action." "I thought the matter was closed," I said, unable to keep the edge out of my voice. "That's what you told me at the board meeting. The board is always willing to work with homeowners toward reasonable solutions," she said, her tone suggesting she was reading from a script. "Would you be available to meet with me and Vice President Hayes this Friday at 4 p.m.? I wanted to say no, wanted to tell her to talk to my lawyer from now on, but Tom had advised me to stay open to dialogue. "I'll be there, at the clubhouse." "Yes, the clubhouse. And Mr. Yardley, please feel free to bring your attorney if you wish." I called Tom immediately after hanging up. "They want to meet, Patricia and the vice president." "That's good," Tom said. "It means the letter scared them. They're worried about liability. Do you want me there? How much would that cost? For a 2-hour meeting, probably $500. I thought about it. $500 was the cost of the fine. If Tom's presence helped get the fine waived and protected my ability to keep the forklift, it was worth it. "Yes, please come. I want them to know I'm serious." Friday afternoon, Tom and I arrived at the clubhouse at 3:55. Tom Brennan was in his mid-40s, tall and lanky, with graying hair and glasses that made him look exactly like what he was, a smart attorney who did his homework. He carried a leather briefcase that probably contained every relevant statute and case law printed out and tabbed. Patricia and Kenneth were already there, seated at a small conference table instead of the formal board setup. Patricia's demeanor was completely different from the board meeting. No gavel, no pearls, no imperious attitude. She actually smiled when we walked in, though it did not reach her eyes. "Mr. Yardley, thank you for coming, and you must be Mr. Brennan. Please have a seat." We sat. Tom opened his briefcase and pulled out a legal pad and a folder of documents. The message was clear. We came prepared. Patricia folded her hands on the table. "We've reviewed your attorney's letter and your appeal documents more carefully. The board may have been hasty in our initial denial. We're interested in finding a compromise that works for everyone." "What kind of compromise?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral. Kenneth Hayes cleared his throat. "The covenant's purpose is to maintain aesthetics and property values. We're concerned that industrial equipment is not appropriate for a residential setting. However, we understand you have a legitimate business need. What if we required you to screen the forklift from street view? Perhaps a fence or landscaping?" I glanced at Tom, who gave a slight nod. "My driveway is on the side of my house," I said. "I could potentially install a privacy fence along that side, but it would need to be tall enough and positioned so that I can still access the driveway with the forklift. "How tall is the forklift?" Patricia asked. "About 7 feet at its highest point. An 8-foot privacy fence along the side property line would screen it from the street completely." Patricia and Kenneth exchanged looks. "That could be acceptable," Patricia said slowly. "But we would need to approve the fence design to ensure it meets our standards." Tom spoke up for the first time. "Let's be clear about what we're discussing. You're proposing that Mr. Yardley invest several $1,000s in a fence to address a covenant violation that may not actually apply to his essential business equipment. Before my client commits to that expense, I need to understand whether the board is willing to formally waive the current fine and any future penalties related to the forklift, provided the fence is installed." "We would need to see the fence proposal first," Kenneth said. "No," Tom said firmly. "That's not how this works. My client is not going to spend money on a fence only to have you reject it and continue enforcing fines. Here's what we're proposing. The board acknowledges that Mr. Yardley's forklift is essential equipment for his licensed business, which is permitted by the village of Naperville. The board agrees to waive all existing and future fines related to the forklift. In exchange, Mr. Yardley agrees to install a privacy fence within 90 days to screen the equipment from street view, subject to reasonable board approval of the fence design. If the board rejects his fence proposal, it must provide specific, objective reasons, and Mr. Yardley will have the opportunity to modify his proposal." I loved watching Tom work. He had just turned their vague compromise into a specific agreement that protected me at every point. Patricia looked uncomfortable. "I would need to present this to the full board." "Of course," Tom said. "We'll put this in writing. The board can vote on it at your next meeting. In the meantime, all enforcement actions regarding the forklift are suspended pending the board's decision." We spent another 30 minutes hammering out details. Tom drafted an agreement on his laptop right there in the conference room, printed it using the clubhouse's printer, and had everyone sign it as a preliminary memorandum of understanding, subject to full board approval. Walking out to the parking lot, I felt like I had just survived a battle. "That went better than expected," I said to Tom. "They knew they were on shaky legal ground," Tom explained. "Your business license is a big problem for them. If they pushed this and lost, they could be liable for significant damages, plus legal fees. The fence compromise lets them save face while backing down. You think the full board will approve it? They'd be stupid not to, and if they don't, we file suit, but I think they will." He was right. At the next board meeting, which I did not attend but received minutes from via email, the board voted 4-1 to approve the compromise agreement. The only dissenting vote was Patricia Morrison, which did not surprise me, but she was overruled. The formal agreement arrived by mail a week later. I had it reviewed by Tom, signed it, and returned it. The $500 fine was officially waived. I had 90 days to install the fence. I got quotes from 3 fencing companies. The cheapest proposal was $4,200 for an 8-foot cedar privacy fence running along the side of my property, about 60 feet in length. It hurt to spend that much, but it was better than the alternative. I submitted my fence design proposal to the HOA board with detailed drawings, material specifications, and photos of similar fences in other parts of the subdivision. 2 weeks later, I received approval with no modifications required. The fence company started work in early December. The weather was cold but dry, which was lucky for Illinois in December. They finished in 3 days, and the result was actually really nice. The cedar looked good, and it completely blocked the forklift from street view while still allowing me full access to my driveway. I thought that was the end of it. I was wrong. In mid-January, I received another letter from the HOA. This time, it was a notice that the board was investigating whether my business operations violated the covenant's restrictions on business activities. Apparently, Patricia Morrison was not done with me. The notice cited reports of commercial delivery trucks and concerns about business traffic in the neighborhood. It requested that I provide detailed information about my business operations, including how many deliveries I received per month, what hours I operated, and how many employees or contractors visited my property. I called Tom Brennan immediately. She's going after my business now. The forklift thing did not work, so she's trying a different angle. Tom sighed. Send me the notice. Let's see what they're actually claiming. I scanned and emailed it to him. He called me back an hour later. This is harassment. You complied with their demands, installed the fence, and now they're manufacturing new violations. How many delivery trucks do you actually get? Maybe 2 or 3 a month. Food suppliers, equipment deliveries, that kind of thing. They're normal box trucks, not 18-wheelers. And Marcus comes over maybe twice a week to help with prep work, but that's it. No customers ever come to the house. Document everything. Start keeping a log of every delivery, every time Marcus visits, everything. Take photos if possible. We may need to prove that your business activities are minimal and have no real impact on the neighborhood. For the next month, I kept meticulous records. Every delivery got logged with the date, time, company name, and duration. I took photos of the trucks, none of which were larger than standard rental moving trucks. Marcus signed in and out every time he came over, noting what work we did. I documented everything. In February, I received a notice for another HOA hearing. This time, they were proposing to revoke my ability to operate any business from my property based on excessive commercial activity, incompatible with residential character. This was war. Patricia Morrison had decided I was her enemy, and she was going to use every tool at her disposal to force me out or shut down my business. The hearing was scheduled for February 20th. Tom and I prepared like we were going to trial. We assembled all my documentation, prepared written statements, and even got affidavits from 3 of my neighbors stating that my business caused them no disruption whatsoever. The night of the hearing, the clubhouse was more crowded than before. Word had spread through the neighborhood about the HOA's aggressive enforcement tactics. Rachel Tanaka was there, along with several other residents who had been on the receiving end of Patricia's violation notices. I realized I was not the only one she had been targeting. The hearing started with Patricia presenting her case against me. She had photos of delivery trucks in front of my house, though the timestamps showed they were never there for more than 15 or 20 minutes. She had a chart showing that Marcus visited my property an average of 8 times per month, which she characterized as excessive business traffic. She even had a noise complaint, though when Tom pressed her for details, it turned out to be from a single anonymous call about loud music at 10 p.m. On a Saturday night, which could have been from anyone's house and probably had nothing to do with my business. When it was my turn, Tom systematically dismantled every argument. He showed that the delivery trucks were standard commercial vehicles that spent less time at my house than trucks delivering furniture or appliances to any other house. He demonstrated that Marcus's visits were less frequent than most people having friends over for dinner. He presented my business license and the village's determination that my operations were appropriate for residential areas. Then he played his trump card. The board is engaged in selective enforcement and harassment of Mr. Yardley. He complied with every requirement you imposed, installed a $4,200 fence at your demand, and now you're manufacturing new violations. This is discriminatory enforcement, and if it continues, we will have no choice but to file suit against the board and its individual members for interference with his business and violation of the Illinois Home-Based Business Act. The room went silent. Patricia's face turned red. Are you threatening this board? I'm informing you of the legal consequences of your actions, Tom said calmly. Mr. Yardley has a right to operate his licensed business. You've acknowledged that by approving the fence compromise. Now you're trying to revoke that agreement by claiming his minimal business activities are excessive. That's bad faith and it's actionable. Kenneth Hayes looked uncomfortable. He leaned over and whispered something to Patricia, who shook her head sharply. But Deanne Fletcher, the treasurer, spoke up. I think we should table this matter and seek legal counsel before proceeding. We don't want to expose the HOA to litigation. I agree, said Linda Kowalski, the member at large who had been silent most of the evening. I've reviewed Mr. Yardley's documentation, and his business activities seem minimal. I don't see grounds for revocation. Patricia banged her gavel. This matter will be tabled pending legal review. Hearing adjourned. She stormed out of the clubhouse before anyone else could speak. Kenneth and the other board members gathered their materials and left quickly, avoiding eye contact with anyone. After they left, several neighbors came up to me. Rachel Tanaka was first. You need to do something about her. She's out of control. I'm trying, I said. But she's the board president. She has a lot of power. An older man I recognized from down the street extended his hand. Jim Reynolds, I've been watching what Patricia's been doing to you and others. I think it's time we organized. There are a lot of people in this neighborhood who are fed up with her petty tyranny. Over the next week, I learned just how widespread the dissatisfaction was. Jim Reynolds organized a meeting at his house, and 23 residents showed up. Everyone had stories about Patricia's enforcement actions. One couple had been fined for having their trash cans visible from the street 15 minutes before pickup time. Another resident had been cited for having a basketball hoop in his driveway because it detracted from aesthetic uniformity. A woman had been fined for planting roses in the wrong color. They were red instead of the approved pink or white. The stories were absurd, but they also revealed a pattern. Patricia Morrison was using the HOA as her personal fiefdom, enforcing rules selectively and harshly against anyone she perceived as challenging her authority or not meeting her standards. Jim Reynolds had done his research. The HOA bylaws allow for a recall election of board members if 20% of homeowners sign a petition. We have 214 homes in this subdivision. We need 43 signatures. We had 23 people in the room, and everyone signed immediately. Over the next 2 weeks, we canvassed the neighborhood. The response was overwhelming. People were afraid to speak up individually, but when they realized others felt the same way, they eagerly signed. We collected 67 signatures, well over the threshold. We submitted the petition in mid-March. Under the bylaws, the board had to schedule a recall election within 30 days. Patricia fought it, of course. She sent out a letter to all residents claiming that the recall was organized by disgruntled rule breakers who wanted to turn the neighborhood into a chaotic eyesore. She held a special meeting to defend her record, attended by fewer than 10 people. The election was scheduled for April 18th. Every household got one vote. The question was simple. Should Patricia Morrison be removed as board president? The campaign was surprisingly intense for a neighborhood HOA election. Jim Reynolds and others organized a door-to-door effort explaining why Patricia needed to go. Patricia sent multiple mailings defending herself and attacking the recall organizers. It got nasty. On election day, I voted early and then went to work. I had a wedding reception that evening, so I was not around for the vote count. But as I was loading my truck after the event, around 11 p.m., my phone exploded with texts. "She's gone. Recall passed 142 to 58. Patricia Morrison has been removed." I felt a weight lift that I had not even realized I was carrying. The neighborhood had spoken, and they had rejected Patricia's reign. The board appointed Kenneth Hayes as interim president and scheduled a special election for May to fill the position permanently. Jim Reynolds announced he was running, along with 2 other residents who wanted to see the HOA focus on actual community building rather than petty enforcement. But Patricia Morrison was not done. In late April, I received a summons. Patricia had filed a personal lawsuit against me, Tom Brennan, and Jim Reynolds for defamation, harassment, and conspiracy to damage her reputation. I could not believe it. The woman had been voted out by her own community, and her response was to sue the people who organized against her. Tom Brennan's response was swift and brutal. He filed a motion to dismiss based on anti-SLAPP statutes, laws designed to protect people from lawsuits intended to silence legitimate speech and petitioning. He also filed a counterclaim against Patricia for abuse of process and sought sanctions against her attorney for filing a frivolous lawsuit. The hearing on the motion to dismiss was in early June. Patricia's attorney was a young guy who looked fresh out of law school and completely out of his depth. He argued that his client had been subjected to a coordinated attack on her character and reputation. The judge, a no-nonsense woman in her 60s named Judge Sandra Martinez, was not impressed. "Mr. Harris, your client was an elected official in a homeowners association who was removed through a legitimate recall election. The defendants circulated a petition and organized community members to vote. That's protected political speech and petitioning activity. What's the basis for your defamation claim? What false statements were made?" The attorney fumbled through his file. "They called her a tyrant and accused her of harassment. Were those statements made as factual assertions or opinions based on disclosed facts?" I believe they were presented as facts." "You have any evidence that the statements were false? Did your client not issue the violations and fines described in the defendant's campaign materials?" "She did issue those, but they were legally justified under the HOA covenants." "Then how is it defamatory to say she issued them?" "The defendants characterized her actions as excessive and tyrannical. That's an opinion." "Was your client denied due process in the recall election?" "No, Your Honor, but the campaign against her was coordinated and intentional." Judge Martinez actually laughed. "That's how elections work, counsel. People organize and campaign. If that's your standard for harassment, every political campaign in America would be illegal." She granted Tom's motion to dismiss with prejudice, meaning Patricia could not refile. Then she addressed the sanctions request. "Mr. Harris, I'm going to give you the benefit of the doubt and assume you simply did not understand anti-SLAPP law before filing this case. I will not impose sanctions against you personally. However, I am sanctioning your client for filing a frivolous lawsuit designed to punish people for exercising their legal rights. Patricia Morrison is ordered to pay the defendant's legal fees." When we walked out of the courthouse, Tom was grinning. "That went better than I expected. She'll probably appeal, but she'll lose. And now she has to pay our fees, which are going to be substantial." The fee award ended up being $18,000, split among me, Tom in his capacity as a defendant and Jim Reynolds, $6,000 each. Patricia's attorney filed a motion to reduce the amount, but Judge Martinez denied it. Meanwhile, life in Riverside Meadows was improving. Jim Reynolds won the special election for board president in May with almost 70% of the vote. His first action was to propose a complete review and revision of the HOA covenants, to remove petty restrictions and clarify enforcement procedures. The new board also formally apologized to me, Rachel Tanaka, and several other residents who had been subjected to what they acknowledged was overly aggressive and unreasonable enforcement. My fence requirement stood, but they refunded half the cost as a gesture of goodwill. Patricia Morrison's appeal was denied in August. She was ordered to pay the sanctions award plus interest. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that she and her husband were putting their house up for sale. In September, I ran into her at the grocery store. It was awkward. We were both in the produce section, and there was no way to avoid each other. She looked older than I remembered, tired. "Mr. Yardley," she said stiffly. "Mrs. Morrison." We stood there for a moment in uncomfortable silence. Then, surprisingly, she spoke again. "I want you to know I was doing what I thought was right for the neighborhood. Property values, community standards, these things matter." I wanted to tell her that people's lives and livelihoods mattered more than her aesthetic preferences. I wanted to point out that she had made dozens of families miserable over trivial issues. But looking at her defeated expression, I realized she probably already knew. "I understand you thought you were doing the right thing," I said. It was not forgiveness, but it was not vindictiveness either. She nodded and walked away, pushing her cart toward the checkout lanes. A few weeks later, the "for sale" sign went up in front of her house. They moved out in October, and a young family with 2 kids moved in shortly after. The new neighbors were friendly and normal, and they did not care about my forklift behind its fence. The revised HOA covenants were approved by homeowner vote in November. The new rules focused on genuine community concerns like property maintenance and safety, while eliminating most of the petty restrictions. Vegetable gardens were explicitly allowed. Home-based businesses that complied with local ordinances were permitted without board approval. Commercial equipment could be stored on properties if screened from street view. It was everything I had wanted from the beginning, common sense rules that respected people's property rights while maintaining reasonable standards. My catering business continued to thrive. Without the constant stress of HOA battles, I could focus on growing the company. By the end of the year, I had hired 2 part-time employees and was booking events 3 months in advance. The forklift sat behind its cedar fence, ready whenever I needed it, which was almost daily. Rachel Tanaka's tomato plants grew to over 6 feet the next summer, producing more tomatoes than she could eat. She brought bags of them to neighborhood gatherings, and everyone agreed they were the best tomatoes they had ever tasted. Jim Reynolds turned out to be an excellent board president. He organized community events, improved communication between the board and residents, and focused on maintaining amenities rather than enforcing petty rules. The neighborhood actually felt like a community for the first time since I had moved in. In December, almost exactly 1 year after the first violation notice about my forklift, the new HOA board threw a holiday party at the clubhouse. It was the first community event in years that actually felt welcoming and fun. Kids ran around playing while adults chatted and ate cookies. Jim Reynolds gave a short speech thanking everyone for working together to create a better neighborhood. A community is only as strong as its respect for each member's rights and dignity, he said. We're not perfect, but we're working to build a place where people can live their lives, pursue their dreams, and feel at home. That's what an HOA should do. Standing there with a cup of hot cider, Watching my neighbors laugh and enjoy themselves, I thought about everything that had happened. The stress, the legal battles, the money spent on lawyers and fences. It had been exhausting and frustrating, but it had been worth it. I had stood up for my rights and my business. I had helped organize a community to push back against unreasonable authority. And in the end, we had won. Not just for me, but for everyone in Riverside Meadows who wanted to live without fear of petty tyrants and arbitrary rules. My phone buzzed with an email. A new client inquiry for a corporate event in February, my busiest month. I smiled and made a mental note to respond first thing Monday morning. The forklift was ready. My business was strong. And for the first time since moving to this neighborhood, I felt like I was truly home. Life was not perfect. Business had its ups and downs, and the HOA still had occasional disagreements and enforcement issues. But there was a fundamental difference now. People were treated with respect. Rules were enforced fairly and reasonably. And when conflicts arose, they were handled through dialogue and compromise rather than threats and fines. The cedar fence weathered to a beautiful silver gray over time. I added some landscaping around it, planting native bushes that attracted butterflies and birds. The forklift behind it kept working, kept earning its keep, kept being exactly what it was, essential equipment for a legitimate business. Sometimes I would walk out to my driveway and just look at that fence, remembering everything it represented. The cost of standing up for yourself. The importance of community organizing. The power of ordinary people to change unreasonable systems. And I would think about Patricia Morrison, wherever she had moved to, hopefully learning that control and power are not the same as leadership and respect. The story of my battle with the HOA became neighborhood legend, told to new residents as both a warning and a reassurance. A warning that HOAs can overstep. A reassurance that when they do, they can be stopped. Marcus came over one afternoon in early spring, helping me load equipment for a wedding. He looked at the fence and shook his head. Remember when you thought you might have to choose between your business and your house? I remember thinking about moving, I admitted. Finding a place with no HOA, maybe a commercial property where I could live and work. I am glad you stayed and fought. Me too. We loaded the forklift onto my trailer, secured it properly, and headed out to the venue. The machine lifted pallets of chairs, tables, and kitchen equipment with the same steady efficiency it always had. Essential equipment. That is what it was, what it had always been. The wedding was beautiful. The food was perfect. The clients were thrilled. As I drove home that night, exhausted but satisfied, I passed the Riverside Meadows entrance sign. Someone had planted flowers around it, bright tulips and daffodils that would have been cited as non-conforming under the old regime. Now they were just pretty flowers, making the neighborhood more welcoming. I pulled into my driveway, backed the trailer through the gate in my fence, and unloaded the forklift. Tomorrow I had 2 events. Next week I had 5. Business was good, the neighborhood was good, and my essential equipment was right where it needed to be. The whole ordeal had taught me lessons I would not forget. Stand up for your rights, but pick your battles carefully. Document everything. Get good legal advice early. Find allies and build coalitions. Be willing to compromise when reasonable, but do not back down from bullies. Most importantly, I had learned that systems designed to serve communities can be corrupted by individuals seeking power and control. But those systems can also be reclaimed by people willing to work together for change. The forklift sat silently in the driveway behind its fence, illuminated by my porch light. It was just a machine, metal and hydraulics and wheels. But it represented something bigger. The right to earn a living, to use your property reasonably, to be treated fairly by those given authority over community affairs. I went inside, made myself a late dinner, and sat down to plan the next day's prep work. The house was quiet and comfortable, truly my home now in ways it had not been before. I had fought for it, had defended my right to live and work here on reasonable terms, and I had won. Outside, past the cedar fence, the forklift waited for tomorrow's work. Essential equipment, properly stored, no longer a problem for anyone who mattered. Just one man's tool for building his business and his life in a neighborhood that had finally learned to leave well enough alone.